didn't say a word, not one. I stood in my kitchen at 11:30 at night, the overhead light humming the way it always does in December. And I just stood there holding my phone with both hands like it might fall through the floor if I let go. My daughter had sent me that video by accident. I know she didn't mean to. She was forwarding it to her friend, and she hit my name instead. We're right beside each other in her contacts, we always have been. She called me 40 seconds later in a panic, and I let it go to voicemail. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea I never drink, and I sat down at the kitchen table and I watched it 3 more times. My son-in-law was not alone in that video, and the woman with him was not my daughter. The wedding had been 14 months ago. I had helped my daughter pick out the flowers, cream dahlias and baby's breath, because she said she wanted something classic but soft. I remember standing in the florist on Elgin Street in Ottawa, the two of us laughing because she couldn't decide between ivory and white, and I told her nobody in the room was going to know the difference except her. She had cried a little, happy tears. I had handed her a tissue from my purse and thought, this is one of the best days of my life. 14 months. I set my phone face down on the table and I looked at the ceiling and I thought, what do you do with this? My daughter's name is Lily. She is 34 years old. She has her father's eyes and my stubbornness, and she has been in love with her husband since she was 26 and met him at a work conference in Toronto. His name is Connor. He is 37. He coaches recreational hockey on Sunday mornings. He makes a very good beef stew, and until 11:30 on a Tuesday night in December, I would have said without hesitation that he was exactly the right person for my daughter. The woman in the video, I recognized her. That was the part that sat in my chest like a stone. Her name is Sabine. She is Lily's closest friend from university. They have been inseparable for over a decade. She was maid of honor at the wedding. She stood up there in a dusty rose dress, and she cried during the vows, and she gave a toast at the reception that made every single person in the room tear up, including me. She talked about how Lily deserved every good thing in this world. She said Connor was the answer to every prayer Lily had ever whispered. I sat at that kitchen table until 2 in the morning. I am 63 years old. I was married for 31 years before my husband passed. I have lived long enough to know that the wrong move made in the first hour of a crisis can ripple outward for decades. I have also lived long enough to know that you cannot unknow something. Once you have seen what I saw on that phone, you carry it. It lives inside you, and the question is not whether to carry it. You have no choice about that. The question is what you do while you're carrying it. I did not call Lily that night. I want to be very clear about why, because I know what people will say. I know there are people who will hear this and think, why didn't you just call your daughter the moment you found out? What kind of mother waits? The kind of mother who knows her daughter. Lily is not a person who absorbs information slowly. She feels everything at full volume, immediately, and she acts before she thinks. If I had called her at midnight and said what I had seen, she would have confronted Connor within the hour. She would have done it alone, in the dark, while she was still in shock. She would have had no support around her, no time to process, no ground under her feet. And Connor. I had to think about Connor too, not to protect him, but because I needed to understand what I was actually dealing with before I said a single word to my daughter. I needed to know if this was a recent thing or something older. I needed to know if Sabine was still in her life in the same way. I needed to know how deep this went. So I waited. I called in sick to my part-time bookkeeping work the next morning. I know that sounds small, but I'm telling you every detail because I want you to understand that this was not a casual few days. This took everything I had. I reached out to a woman I know through my church community, a retired family counselor named Greta. I didn't tell her specifics. I just asked her, hypothetically, if someone discovered infidelity involving a family member and a close friend, what were the considerations before coming forward? She talked for 40 minutes. I took notes on the back of an old grocery list. I still have that paper somewhere. Then I started doing what I do when I don't know what to do. I got organized. I asked my daughter a week earlier if she and Connor were still planning to use Sabine's family cabin in Quebec over the holidays. She had said yes, absolutely. They were going up the 23rd. That gave me a date. It gave me a window. And I am not proud of every thought I had during this time, but I am going to be honest. It gave me a reason to wait a little longer and do this properly. I called a young woman who runs a small digital services business out of her home in Kanata. I found her through a neighborhood Facebook group. Her name is Priya, and she is 28 years old and absolutely unflappable. I explained that I had a video on my phone I needed documented, timestamped, backed up, and printed clearly. I told her I might need copies made of some other materials as well. She did not ask me a single unnecessary question. She charged me $160, and she did the job perfectly. I had 3 copies made of everything. One for me, one for Lily, one that I sealed in an envelope and gave to my neighbor Greta to hold without opening, just in case. I am telling you this because I need you to understand. I was not operating on emotion by that point. I was operating on love. There is a difference. Emotion would have had me calling Lily at midnight and burning everything down without a plan. Love meant I took a breath and I thought about my daughter's life. Not just the next 24 hours, but the next 20 years. And I made sure she was going to have something solid to stand on when the floor gave way. The 22nd of December, Lily came over for what she thought was an early Christmas dinner. Just the 2 of us. I'd made her favorite, roast chicken with root vegetables and a wild rice stuffing, the same meal I've made every year since she was small. I'd set the table properly, cloth napkins, the good dishes. She came in laughing about traffic on the 417, and she smelled like her perfume and her cheeks were red from the cold, and I thought, she has no idea. She is completely happy right now, and she has no idea. We ate most of dinner before I said anything. I let her tell me about work. I let her talk about the cabin. I asked about Connor, and she said he was wonderful. He'd been so thoughtful lately. Actually, he'd surprised her with flowers last week for no reason. She said it in this warm, private voice, like she was remembering a moment that was just hers. That nearly broke me. I set down my fork. I said, Lily, there's something I need to show you, and I need you to know that I have thought very carefully about how to do this, and I love you more than anything in this world. She looked at me the way children look at their parents when they already know something is wrong, but they're hoping they're wrong about knowing. That face. I will never forget that face. I slid the envelope across the table. She did not open it right away. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at me. Then she opened it. I had put the clearest screenshot first, not to be cruel, because waiting would have been crueler. I had thought about this. I had talked to Greta about sequencing. First the clearest image, then the timestamps, then the messages I had found. Because yes, once I started looking, there were messages too. Lily had given me her passwords years ago. after a medical scare in case something ever happened to her. I had never used them until this. She was quiet for a very long time. I have a clock in my kitchen that I bought at an antique market in Perth, Ontario, about 15 years ago. It ticks quite loudly. I had never noticed it until that night. In the silence after Lily opened that envelope, all I could hear was that clock. She asked me when I found out. I told her the truth. Everything. The accidental video, the nights I sat with it, Priya incarnata, the 3 copies, the sealed envelope at Greta's. I told her why I waited. I told her what I was afraid of if I hadn't. She was quiet again. Then she asked me, very carefully, how long I thought it had been going on. The messages went back 8 months. I told her that too. 8 months. She had celebrated her first wedding anniversary 4 months into it. She had been planning the holiday trip to Quebec with Sabina for 3 of those months. She pushed a chair back from the table and she walked to the window and she stood there with her arms crossed and she looked out at the street for a long time. It was snowing lightly. The neighbors' Christmas lights were on. Everything outside looked completely normal and calm, and I remember thinking how strange it is that the world doesn't stop when your world stops. I did not go to her right away. I had thought about this too. Lily does not want to be reached for in the first moments. She needs a minute to breathe before she can be touched. I know my daughter. After a while, she turned around and she said, "Did you invite me here to tell me, or did you need me here to tell me?" I thought about that. Then I said, "Both." She nodded slowly. She came back to the table. She sat down. She looked at the photos again, more carefully this time, and I watched her face go through about 12 different expressions that I don't have words for, and then she closed the envelope. She said, "I'm not going to the cabin." I said, "I know." She said, "I need to talk to him tonight." And here is where it gets complicated. Here is where I made a decision that I still sit with sometimes, that I have turned over in my mind more times than I can count. I said, "I think you should, but I think you should have someone with you." She looked at me. I said, "I would like to be there." There was a long pause. Then she said, "Why?" I said, "Because the last time you had a difficult conversation alone, you told me afterward that you couldn't remember what you said, and you couldn't remember what he said, and you couldn't remember what he said, and you were left trying to reconstruct the whole thing from memory. I didn't leave a note, table you have to reconstruct." She thought about this. She is her father's daughter too when she actually slows down enough to think. She said, "You want to be a witness." I said, "I want to be your mother." She said, "Okay." We drove to her house in Barhaven together. We barely spoke in the car. She called Connor on the way and told him she was coming home early, that dinner had ended early, that she had something she needed to talk to him about. Her voice on that phone call was the most controlled I have ever heard her. I was so proud of her I could barely see straight. Connor was in the living room when we came in. He looked confused to see me. He started to say something about Christmas plans. Lily put the envelope on the coffee table. What followed, I am not going to describe in detail. Not because it wasn't significant, it was the most significant thing I have ever sat through, but because that part belongs to my daughter, not to this story. What I will say is that it lasted about 2 hours, and at the end of those 2 hours, Connor did not deny anything. He sat on their couch with his face in his hands, and he said he was sorry in the specific, gutted way that people say sorry when they know there is nothing they can do with sorry. Lily did not cry in front of him. She cried in my car afterward, in the parking lot of a Sobeys on Strander Drive at 11 o'clock at night, and I sat beside her and I let her cry, and I did not say anything useful or wise. I just put my hand on hers and I stayed. Sabine called the next morning. Lily did not answer. She called twice more over the following week. Lily did not answer any of them. 3 weeks after that, I was at Lily's apartment. She had moved temporarily into a sublet in Centretown while things were sorted out, and Sabine showed up at the door unannounced. I was the one who answered it. I don't know what Sabine expected. She looked startled to see me. She had been crying recently. Her eyes showed it. She was holding a small plant, a succulent, like she'd brought a gift. I looked at her for a moment and I thought about the toast she'd given at that wedding, every prayer Lily had ever whispered. I said, "She's not ready." Sabine said, "I know, I need her to know I'm sorry." I said, "She knows." Sabine said, "I didn't mean for any of this." I said, "I know you didn't mean for it to unfold this way, but it did unfold this way, and right now what Lily needs is time and space, and showing up at her door isn't giving her either of those things." Sabine looked at me for a long moment. Her chin trembled. She said, "Is she going to be okay?" I looked at her. I said, "Yes, she is. She's going to be more than okay." Sabine nodded. She set the succulent down on the step. She left. I brought the plant inside. Lily looked at it and said, "What is that?" I said, "Sabine's guilt in plant form." And Lily, for the first time in 3 weeks, laughed. A real laugh. Brief, but real. That plant is still alive, by the way. Lily has it in her apartment window. She says she waters it as a reminder that some things survive whether you want them to or not. I have been asked, by people who know the full story now, whether I regret waiting. Whether I should have told Lily the night I found out. Whether I made the right choice. Here's what I know. My daughter filed for separation in February. The process has not been easy. Nothing about this has been easy. But she has a good lawyer. She has her friends around her, and she has been in therapy since January with a counselor she found through her extended benefits at work. She is not okay yet. She will tell you that herself. But she is upright. She is functional. She is making decisions from a clear head instead of from the middle of a breakdown. Would she have been any of those things if I had called her at midnight alone without a plan? I don't know. Without a plan. I genuinely don't know. What I know is that I made the choice I made because I know my daughter, and I still believe, that the way you deliver devastating news matters as much as the news itself. It matters who is in the room. It matters whether the floor is solid. It matters whether there is someone beside you who already knows the worst of it and is still there. I am 63 years old. I have outlived my husband. I have outlived a version of my family I thought was going to last forever. And I have learned something in all of that living. Surviving something is not the same as escaping it. You go through it. You carry the weight of it. And then, if you are very deliberate and very honest and very willing to sit with the hard thing instead of running from it, you come out on the other side carrying less than you thought you would. Lily called me last Sunday afternoon. She'd been for a long walk along the canal. She said the ice was still thick and the light was good, and she'd bought herself a hot chocolate at the little stand near the Pretoria Bridge. She said she felt, for the first time in a while, like herself again. I sat in my kitchen with a phone to my ear, and I looked out at the snow in the backyard, and I thought, that's it. That's the whole point of all of it. That phone call. That moment. She is going to be fine, and I am going to be fine. And I know that now because we did not run from any of it. We sat across a table with the truth between us, and we let it be what it was, and then we got up and we kept going. That is what a mother does when she can. She keeps the lights on. She stays in the room. She waits until the moment is right, and then she tells the truth, and then she stays. I have been sitting with this story for a while now, and the thing that stays with me most is not the betrayal itself. It is the moment at the kitchen table when I had to decide what kind of mother I was going to be. Not in theory, not in some imagined version of myself, but right then at 11:30 at night, with my phone face down on the table and the chamomile going cold. What Connor and Sabine did had consequences, not because I planned them that way, not because the universe arranged some tidy punishment, but because dishonesty has a weight to it that eventually becomes impossible to carry without dropping something. Connor dropped everything. Sabine lost the closest friendship she had ever had. Those outcomes came directly from their choices, and I think it matters to say that plainly, not with satisfaction but with clarity. The way we treat people is not neutral. It accumulates. It lands somewhere. What I keep thinking about, though, is Lily, because the easier version of this story would have been me calling her at midnight in a panic and her confronting Connor alone in the dark and all of it unraveling in the worst possible way. That version was available to me. I chose a different one, not because I am particularly wise, but because I love her enough to slow down when everything in me wanted to move fast. I think that is what it actually means to care for someone, not just the warmth of it, the easy parts, but the discipline of thinking past your own immediate need to act, sitting with something hard so the other person doesn't have to absorb it alone and unprepared. That took everything I had. I am not going to pretend otherwise. There is a version of strength that looks like loudness. It announces itself. It acts immediately and dramatically, and it expects to be recognized. I have spent 63 years learning that the stronger thing is usually quieter. It is making 3 copies of the documents. It is calling Greta and taking notes on the back of a grocery list. It is setting the table with the good dishes and making the roast chicken because your daughter deserves to have one last ordinary meal before the floor gives way. That is not weakness. That is the kind of endurance that actually holds people together when everything else is falling apart. And I think about Sabine at the door with her little succulent, her chin trembling, asking if Lily was going to be okay. I meant what I said when I told her yes, because Lily has something in her, she has always had it, that does not collapse when things get hard. It bends, dramatically, loudly, with a lot of crying in parking lots, but it does not break. That quality in her did not come from nowhere. It was built, slowly, over years, by being shown that the truth is survivable, by being shown that someone will stay in the room with you even when the room is terrible. That is what I hope for any person hearing this, not that you are spared the hard things. You won't be. None of us are. But that you have someone beside you who has thought carefully about how to hand you the truth. And if you don't have that person yet, that you become that person. For someone, for yourself. Lily called me last Sunday. She'd been walking along the canal, and the light was good, and she'd bought herself a hot chocolate, and she felt, she said, like herself again. That phone call was the whole point of all of it.